Hello. All right. I suppose I should speak through this, right? Okay. Let me just like it. All right. Not breaking any rules, huh? Okay. Let's wait for my slides to be thrown up. The topic today is God real, right? Did I get it right? Good one. Okay, is God real? A sampling of the arguments for the existence of God. Anyone here struggling with this topic? You know, not quite sure whether God is real? Serious question, right? Anyone? Or, okay, maybe not struggling, kind of have thought about this question, and you have entertained doubts before. Anyone? One? Yeah, right, okay. Small group of us. How did we end up on this topic? We went through this, do you remember? Yeah, we had a few sessions about evil and suffering. And I'm not sure if you recall that last year when we spoke about evil and suffering, we mentioned that of all the reasons there are for God, this is the one that is probably the only one standing that is against the existence of God. Do you remember that? And it is a powerful one, right? I mean, of course, we kind of had a preliminary discussion last year, and I hope you continue to explore that topic, right? So when it came to the topic of evil and suffering, we spoke of it being a problem of two levels, right? The intellectual problem and an emotional problem. We spent most of our time exploring the intellectual problem, of which we broke it down to logical and evidential. And then at the last bit, we spoke about the emotional problem, which I also shared that for most people, that's where the root of the problem lies. Yeah? So I'm not so much saying that, everyone must go for inner healing or casting out whatever stuff, but it is, the problem typically lies at a level where we can only start to engage when relationships are built. Yeah? Now, when we explored a little bit further for the evidential problem, we had these three categories. Do you remember them? Right? Human limitations, full scope of evidence, and Christian doctrine. And we're saying that evil and suffering can coexist with God, assuming that we speak about these three domains. Yeah? And under the full scope of evidence, we had this slide. Right? God's existence is probable in spite of coexisting together with evil and suffering if we take in the full scope of the evidence. Right? And from this, actually, what you're seeing here are the arguments for the existence of God. Okay? And they're largely in two categories. That's how I would divide them. And that top group usually can be discussed together. It takes data from without, right? Cosmological arguments, we call them. They are kind of proven out of observable occurrences, right? And those at the bottom takes data from within. They are psychological arguments, right? So kind of something like that. And you would notice that back there, I had a little bit, kind of like only 3 arguments under psychological, and here I have 5. And the truth is that we have more than these. Right? There are about 20, 25 arguments that commonly appear in books. Right? And so I can commend that you're reading. But I want you to know that what we're going to do today is we're just going to take a sampling of some of these arguments. I want you to have a rough idea of what a cosmological argument may sound like, and why we have to contend with these arguments at the level. I want you to have a sampling of a psychological argument. So those that are in bold and in yellow, those are the ones that we'll cover today. Only 2. Okay, and I hope we have enough time to explore this. Under the cosmological argument, the first and efficient cause, I will have one little segment where I need you to discuss. So I hope you're sitting in a group where you're happy, yeah? Not kind of in conflict, right? Okay. Now, one of the things I realize is that whether you are a believer or a non-believer, sometimes we still doubt the existence of God. Yeah? And as believers, sometimes it's even more difficult for us to articulate, right? Because it is assumed that, hey, come on, we should believe in God, us being here. But these arguments are important because some of them are actually strong arguments, right? And they are important because if for some people who cannot even cross this hurdle, it is even more difficult for them to pick up, let's say, our holy book, right, the Bible, and to read about in it a God who loves me. Right? If I don't believe that there's somebody to do the adopting, then why would I want to believe that I am adopted by some God, adopted into his family? Yeah, the same thing for us. I think for some of us, we may not feel that arguments like this is valuable to us, right? Perhaps some of us, we are blessed with just this very keen sense of the divine. Right? Everywhere we go, it's like, oh, God is speaking to me. Oh, this mouse, God he has a sign for me. Right? Some of us are like that. Thank God if you're like that, but not all. But even if we are blessed in this way, I think we should still contend with some of the arguments because who knows, maybe one day God may lead you to have a conversation about some of these things with some of your friends, right? Some people. And besides, even if we consciously claim that we have no doubts about God, the deception of the human heart is that we may unconsciously, right, subconsciously harbor some doubts. And the process of running through arguments, going through some of these things which the church for maybe hundreds, more than 1,000 years we have been thinking about, may come in helpful for you. All right, so as I said, two basic groups. The order that you see here is totally random, right? It's not like most convincing to the least convincing. No, not quite. In fact, the first one over there, the unmoved mover, you may read about it often in kind of pop psychology, but if you delve deep into it, it is really difficult to understand. And that's kind of the main reason why I'm not explaining it. I'm moving on to the second one, right? The first and efficient cause. All right. As I said, there are others that didn't make the list. For example, argument for miracles, right? Just having miracles present in life. Of course, some people deny it, but yet others document it, right? And what can we argue out of miracles? Argument from religious experience, blah, blah, blah. Most of these are not conclusive in and of themselves. In fact, those things that you see up here, by themselves, none of them are very conclusive. Right? In fact, that last one, the Pascal's wager, it's not even an argument, right? It's a bet, lah. Like, you only live once, right? You have kind of one chip, and if you're gonna cast it somewhere, where are you gonna put your insurance at? Hopefully, okay lah, bet it on God lah. If there's a God, at least I win something, right? So, but if you put it all together, then I think they make a very strong case for God being someone real. Now I want to add some caveats here. It's difficult for arguments to argue conclusively that God is real and there is one God, and this God is the God of our Christian faith, Judeo-Christian faith, and this is a God of love, and this is a God who came. It's not possible, right? As I said, the arguments kind of build upon one another. But what we want to do today is to argue that the concept, right, the idea, the reality that God is present is something that can be convincingly argued. Hello? Right, yep. And at the end, I will kind of give a short explanation about why we need more than just arguments. Okay? So let's jump in, all right? Bearded man and non-bearded man. All right, so first cause. And this argument contends with the question, why did the universe begin? Right, and as with all arguments go, they will have premise, conclusion, right? That's kind of how, in the apologetic sphere, we kind of present our case. Okay? Have you all seen this before, this argument? Something along these lines. It says, okay, premise one, right, A and B, right? Premise one, it says, whatever begins to exist has a cause. And the second premise is, the universe began to exist, and if premise one is true, and premise 2 is also true, then the conclusion must be true that therefore the universe has a cause. And of course, as this argument goes, that cause of the universe, as we will see later, is a personal divine being. Okay? Now, who is this bearded guy? That's his name, right? Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali. Anyone heard of Al-Ghazali before? Imam Al-Ghazali. So this guy is a Muslim. He's a Muslim scholar, lived in he's a Persian scholar, right? So currently in the region of Iran, lived around 1100 AD, right? And I'm bringing him up because he has a nice kind of beard and he's a smart guy, right? He's one of the sharpest Muslim scholars, and that was the time when kind of Islam and the Judeo-Christian faith had a lot of conversations. And that was the season, that was the period where many call it the golden age of Islam. In fact, the scholastic work of Islam then far outstripped any other civilization. Yeah? And after this age, Islam moved into an architectural age, right? That's where the Alhambra in Spain, a lot of this Muslim architecture in kind of southern Europe and northern Africa, beautiful buildings, all those things came up. Okay, but it came out of a period where Muslim thought was just so advanced. Now, I'm bringing him up because he was the first person to collect hundreds of years of arguments when he came to this, the cause of the universe, and he put it out in this kind of succinct way, right? It says, every being which begins has a cause for its beginning. Now the world is a being, right? He views the universe, right? That whole complex of stars and the cosmos and everything that we can see. He sees this as one being, and he says, now the world is a being which begins, therefore it possesses a cause. And someone must have brought it into being, all right? Now this guy at the bottom is called William Lane Craig, contemporary guy. I mean, as you can see, right? Kind of suit and tie. Most of my research was based on William Lane Craig's books. Solid guy, you can search him up. One of his books is called On Guard, right? Kind of like, the fencing term. So just apologetic arguments. So if you want a reference point, that's it for you. Now, why is this argument important? Because I feel that this argument is a good one, right? It is logically airtight, right? And I'll explain why. But it is airtight only insofar as we understand the two premises correctly. So let's explore them one by one. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Okay, now follow me closely. Try not to get lost. So when we come to the end, hopefully the whole argument falls together, comes together. All right, so here he says that something cannot come from nothing. Now when you think about this, right, we have all seen kind of those cheesy magician tricks, right? This guy comes up, takes out a top hat, and then whoop, pulls out a rabbit from the hat, right? Magic, as if a rabbit came out of nothing, right? But we all know that it didn't come out of nothing, right? Even if the magic was true, right, that the hat was empty and there are no tricks in it, the whole system consisted of some things, right? There was the magician, there is a hat, there is the air around it, right? And so for something to come out of nothing is an idea that perhaps none of us can come up with an example. Right? Or do you want to try to think of something that came out of nothing? Is it possible to think of something like that? Something material, or maybe even immaterial, right? Kind of like voice and stuff. But those are things that exist in a world that we can see. Now, premise one is kind of interesting, right? Because if premise one is not true, then the whole argument falls. It falls apart. Now, the nothingness here, I'm not sure if you can imagine with me. What would you imagine as a space of nothing? What is the closest thing that can describe a space that contains nothing? A vacuum, right? And in that space of a vacuum, these things have happened before. right? Quantum scientists have created out of light and mirrors shining into vacuum to create sparks, right? Quantum sparks. And it came into existence within that vacuum, right? Now, one of the things I want to point out to you, okay, Daily Mail, right? Who reads Daily Mail here? Or you kind of seen it pop up in your Facebook feed. Kind of a very popular kind of news website, right? Take a look at this other website. Oh man, it's kind of cut out, huh? Okay, it says here physics.org. I mean, sounds a little bit more official, but also actually a pop website, right? It says researchers create light from almost nothing. Now, what's the difference here? What's the difference here? Almost, right? Almost nothing. But many times when we try to research arguments, right, kind of semi-scientific arguments, I mean myself as well, we stumble upon sites like that. Even if we want to research about theology, about biblical studies, you go online and you Google, everything that pops up are popular sites, right? That's why they are so easily found, okay? And many times when we are looking at articles like that, they kind of compress the research facts and they present it in a kind of more palatable way, so that people like us, we will click on the title and we'll read it, and then they earn some ad revenue, right? So, yes, there can be a vacuum, and out of the vacuum, they can create something. But the authors of that article tell us that, it's kind of almost nothing, right? But still, we needed some external aid, right? Beyond that system of the vacuum, within this world, we still needed some stuff to help create those quantum stuff to happen, right? I mean, I'm kind of spouting words that I myself don't quite understand, right? But you think about it, in this lab where they have a space that they have kind of created a vacuum out of it, that vacuum still occupies space, right? And so this argument that says that whatever begins to exist has a cause, that whatever word includes space itself, it includes time. Yeah, so that's where the cosmological argument really begins. You follow? All right, so as we observe the things around us, what we are looking at are things within time and space. And Al-Ghazali is saying that these are all things that begin to exist at some point, right? And let me give you we'll come to an argument about why these things begin to exist. And it's in premise 2. Right, premise 2 says the universe and all that we see, right, the space that we can kind of interact with, the time that we are experiencing as the clock ticks, or even without the clock, right? Time is still moving on, right? These things that we experience are part of the universe, right? The universe that can be observed, and as science progresses, more parts of it can be observed. But this whole thing is one system, and it says that this system had a beginning. It began to exist. Right now, I'm going to share with you 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 2 philosophical and 2 scientific arguments. I'm going to skip the last one, the last scientific argument. I feel it's not the strongest, but also because it's a little bit difficult to understand, so I'm going to cut some corners. But I'm going to put the content down there so that if you want to research, I'm not sure if there's some geeks among us, right? You can go and Google these things. Right, I'm going to cover the first 3, and this will form the bulk of my presentation today. So I hope the recording captures that. Okay. Yeah, so this part is the most important part, right? Because if we can wrap our minds around infinity, then the whole argument comes together. All right, you with me? So the first 2 are kind of thought exercises, right? The third one, the expansion of the universe, concerns the Big Bang. Anyone interested in sciencey stuff? Big Bang? Any science students here? Okay. Oh dear. Cannot smoke. Okay. Anyway, we can have a good conversation then, because I also need to. As I was preparing, I was trying to understand this a little bit more. Okay, so let's jump straight into number 1. An actual infinite number of things cannot exist. what has this got to do with an argument about our time and our space and our universe and everything that we can observe, and whether or not God is real enough to create all these things? Anyone has any idea about this? Now, what is infinity? Math teacher, anyone? Mathematics? No, no one. Engineer. Who's the engineer here? Okay, well, infinity as a concept, I think pretty it's possible for us to understand, right? Something that goes on and on and on, it never really hits the axis, right? But in the world of philosophy, as we are arguing about the cosmos, as we are arguing about theology, we have two concepts of infinity. One is what we call potential infinity, the potential of something happening. And you see here, right? This is a line between 0 and 1. We can cut it into half. There's 0, half, 1, right? Cut it by thirds, 0, 1 third, 2 thirds, and 1. Can we go on some more? Of course we can, right? We all know that. If not, we have to repeat whichever grade, right? In quarters, fifths, sixths. Can we go on some more? Yeah, right? Just increase the number at the bottom, right? Increase the denominator, 8s, 9s, 10s, 12s. You can go on, and potentially we can go on forever, right? But if this 0 to 1 is a real, actual infinity, then if we were to, if I were to press you to identify a number on the infinity, it's not possible, right? Because that number would potentially be able to be divided more, right? That point would not exist because it would be able to be divisible into smaller bits, right? So potentially infinity, yes, we can understand the concept, but actual, when it comes to the real world, the observable world, is it really there? That's the question that the philosophical argument number 1 is trying to answer. An actual infinite number of things cannot exist. Now, why is this important? Because of the universe being timeless. If it didn't begin, then it must have existed from infinity. Actual infinity, not just potential, right? Now, I'm going to play this video called Hilbert's Hotel. It's a thought exercise by kind of by this guy called Hilbert, right? Hilbert's Hotel. Name his hotel after somebody else. And he'll try to explain the absurdity of actual infinity. Okay, so listen to it, and then after that, we can have some discussion. All right? You guys ready? There, TED Ed, right? Kind of course, facts, right? TED Ed. Okay, I'm going to take a seat.
Room for him. How? Easy. He asks the guest in room number 1 to move to room 2, the guest in room 2 to move to room 3, and so on. Every guest moves from room number n to room number n plus 1. Since there are an infinite number of rooms, there is a new room for each existing guest. This leaves room 1 open for the new customer. The process can be repeated for any finite number of new guests. If, say, a tour bus unloads 40 new people looking for rooms, then every existing guest just moves from room number n to room number n plus 40, thus opening up the first 40 rooms. But now, an infinitely large bus with a countably infinite number of passengers pulls up to rent rooms. Countably infinite is the key. Now, the infinite bus of infinite passengers perplexes the night manager at first, but he realizes there's a way to place each new person. He asks the guest in room 1 to move to room 2. He then asks the guest in room 2 to move to room 4, the guest in room 3 to move to room 6, and so on. Each current guest moves from room number n to room number 2n. filling up only the infinite even-numbered rooms. By doing this, he has now emptied all of the infinitely many odd-numbered rooms, which are then taken by the people filing off the infinite bus. Everyone's happy, and the hotel's business is booming more than ever. Well, actually, it is booming exactly the same amount as ever, banking an infinite number of dollars a night. Word spreads about this incredible hotel. People pour in from far and wide. One night, the unthinkable happens. The night manager looks outside and sees an infinite line of infinitely large buses, each with a countably infinite number of passengers. What can he do? If he cannot find rooms for them, the hotel will lose out on an infinite amount of money, and he will surely lose his job. Luckily, he remembers that around the year 300 BCE, Euclid proved that there is an infinite quantity of prime numbers. So to accomplish this seemingly impossible task of finding infinite beds for infinite buses of infinite weary travelers, the night manager assigns every current guest to the first prime number, 2, raised to the power of their current room number. So the current occupant of room number 7 goes to room number 2 to the 7th power, which is room 128. The night manager then takes the people on the first of the infinite buses and assigns them to the room number of the next prime, 3, raised to the power of their seat number on the bus. So the person in seat number 7 on the first bus goes to room number 3 to the 7th power, or room number 2187. This continues for all of the first bus. The passengers on the second bus are assigned powers of the next prime, 5. The following bus, powers of 7. Each bus follows powers of 11, powers of 13, powers of 17, etc. Since each of these numbers only has 1 and the natural number powers of their prime number base as factors, there are no overlapping room numbers. All the bus's passengers fan out into rooms using unique room assignment schemes based on unique prime numbers. In this way, the night manager can accommodate every passenger on every bus, although there will be many rooms that go unfilled, like room 6, since 6 is not a power of any prime number. Luckily, his bosses weren't very good in math, so his job is safe. The night manager's strategies are only possible because while the infinite hotel is certainly a logistical nightmare, it only deals with the lowest level of infinity, namely the countable infinity of the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Georg Cantor called this level of infinity Aleph 0. We use natural numbers for the room numbers as well as the seat numbers on the buses. If we were dealing with higher orders of infinity, such as that of the real numbers, these structured strategies would no longer be possible, as we have no way to systematically include every number. The real number infinite hotel has negative number rooms in the basement, fractional rooms, so the guy in room 1/2 always suspects he has less room than the guy in room 1, square root rooms like room radical 2, and room pi, where the guests expect free dessert. What self-respecting night manager would ever want to work there, even for an infinite salary? But over at Hilbert's Infinite Hotel, where there's never any vacancy and always room for more, the scenarios faced by the ever-diligent and maybe too hospitable night manager serve to remind us of just how hard it is for our relatively finite minds to grasp a concept as large as infinity. Maybe you can help tackle these problems after a good night's sleep, but honestly, we might need you to change rooms at 2 a.m.
Right, so Hilbert's Hotel concerns kind of numbers, right? Countable numbers. And we kind of try to work our way around and remove the numbers around. But once we include real numbers, which, as you said, as you had heard, things start to fall apart. Infinity is like that, right? Let me just move on to, okay. An actual infinite number of things as we are thinking about time past, right? Time that had elapsed. If the universe started without anyone creating it, or it didn't have a source of creation, let's not talk about anyone yet, right? Maybe it created itself. If it didn't have a beginning, then the universe must have been infinite. But infinity as a actual concept, not a potential concept, is absurd in this sense, right? Think about the hotel again. Let's say the infinite number of buses came and you filled them up using prime number rooms. And then half your guests wanted to check out. Right? Half your guests wanted to check out. Now that half of the guests would constitute how many number? What number? An infinite number of guests, right? So an infinite number of guests wanted to check out of your infinite hotel, and all of them checked out, but still your hotel was infinitely full. Right? So as we think about time, okay, so the hotel is just a placeholder for whatever concept you want to place in. Right? You substitute hotel with time. Or not time, right? The age of the universe. Then the question is it an actual infinite? Or are you just thinking in terms of potential? So when it comes to Al-Ghazali, he's saying that if we do this thought exercise, perhaps just going by this argument alone, we can kind of argue that the universe must have started at some point. All right? Now, I want us to discuss this, right? If we are talking about past time, right? An infinite number of past events, each event being perhaps a second, a fraction of a second, is impossible. But what about the future? Is it possible to live eternity? Right, we're talking about Christian stuff here, right? To live for eternity with God. Is that then possible? Is it actually or merely potential? Right, because if we're going to argue about God from this perspective, then we have to argue into our hope using that same perspective, right? Is it possible? How is eternity different from an infinite number of moments in time? All right, can we kind of discuss in our groups and give you a little bit of time, right? Let's not take too long. 10 minutes, is that enough? 5? Okay, let's start discussing lah. When I hear no more sound, I know that we're done. All right, and then I'm going to answer these questions. Okay? all right, let's come back here, okay? Infinite number of things cannot exist. The argument for this is the absurdity of infinity, right? So again, now we're thinking, okay, so the philosophical argument number one is talking about the universe beginning to exist, okay? So you cannot talk about it independent of this idea, right? And anyway, this is not the exciting part, we haven't come to the Christian part yet, right? So we're saying that the universe as we observe, it either started to exist or it didn't start to exist, right? It's either eternal or it was brought into being. Yep, exactly, right? So if the universe simply existed, then it didn't need a creator, correct? And so therefore the universe must be infinite. It must have existed for infinite number of time, because right now in this time and space, time exists. Right? If we are living in a world where there's space but no time, then we don't have to contend with this. The universe could have existed from eternity past, but the concept that word eternity wouldn't make sense because we wouldn't even be talking about it, right? Now, no wonder I cannot breathe. This thing. Yeah. Okay. So the philosophical argument is saying that if you think back by thinking of not potential infinity but actual infinity, would that thought even be possible? Right. So instead of extending Hubert Hotel as rooms to forward in time, you're extending Hubert Hotel backwards in time, each room being a moment in time, no matter what your unit is, right? You're talking about cutting units, right? No matter how nano you cut the units, each of that can be one room. So you're extending Hubert Hotel backwards in time. Is it possible? So if that's possible, you can actually fit more time into time itself. Or you can check out of Hubert's Hotel, right? So you can subtract time. You can subtract infinity from our experience now, and it will still be infinity. So this could be the start of time, because we are subtracting infinity out of the infinite number of time that has passed. Right? That's the philosophical argument for Hubert's Hotel. Does that make sense? Not convincing? Okay, we can continue to contend with this, okay? I'm gonna just barge my way forward because we have some content to cover. All right. But I'm gonna give you the answers for what I think is what the answer should be, right? So as we extend Hubert's Hotel backwards, we're saying it's not possible, right? Then moving it forward is not possible as well. The future is not eternal, right? The future is not eternal. Because we're not talking about potentially infinite future, we're talking about actual. Is it possible that this experience, as we know of, this universe, can exist forever? The answer is no. But how is eternity different from an infinite number of moments in time moving forward? Right, the future, as we think of moving forward, is different from the eternity that we speak of in the Bible, right? Because as God created the world, and put it into being. Okay, let's just use Christianese here, right? It's easier to understand. As he created this world and time and space and made it happen, right? That unmoved first cause created the world, right? And created time and it started moving. But if backwards, the Hubert Hotel backwards is not possible, we're saying forward logically or philosophically doesn't make sense as well. And it's perfectly fine, because at that point, God will end it, and eternity begins. And the eternity is not our experience of time and space as we experience now, right? It's not our sense of colors as we experience now, right? We're not quite sure. Of course, the Bible doesn't tell us. It doesn't go into the speculative area of theology, right? But for maybe not 2,000 years, for about, maybe for 2,000 years, right? Because it started with Greek philosophy. People have been thinking about this, and this has been part of Christian thought. And as I showed you, right, as we entered into the thousands and 1100s, the Muslim scholars came in, and we had a great discussion about this. And this is the kind of God that we're thinking about. This is the kind of eternity that we're thinking about. All right? Okay, let's move forward. Okay, present your answers. Okay, over already. Okay, now I want to talk about this, right? Still on the same idea of the universe being eternal, or it started to exist. The philosophical argument number two may solve some of the questions that I heard. going about in the groups, it says we cannot pass through an infinite number of elements, one at a time, and arriving to where we are now. Right? So let's say we take this element as a second, or a day, one day, right? And so if we have, again, I think this thought came from Ghazali, he kind of refined it from one of the other Muslim thinkers. They're saying that if today we encounter this ancient one, right, who since eternity started to count down backwards until he reached this point where he's with us, and it's point zero, it's day zero. So yesterday for him was day -1. Right? He's moving through infinite number of elements one at a time, and eventually he arrives here in this session. He walks in the door and says, "Hey guys, I came from eternity past, and I've been counting down, and now today has happened." Now Ghazali is saying that it's impossible, right? Because as we're counting back from eternity, as we're adding days to arrive at this day, we're adding numbers, right? We're kind of adding, what do you call it? A number of element, right? In this case, it's 1 day. We're adding 1 day at a time. So this thought experiment falls apart if we ask ourselves, if you're counting back from eternity, why did not this day happen yesterday? Right? Because you have gone through an infinite number of moments, of elements. Right? But if someone walks in today and says that today is the day that I've counted to this day could very well have been yesterday. And it could have very well been 2 days ago. Right? So as time passes and each moment exists, those moments are added on to another moment that had passed. Right? So for this moment to exist, for us to have this conversation in this moment, it must have time must have come forward unit by unit until this moment. Right? That's the second philosophical argument. And that's all there is to it. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? All right? So as we are thinking of counting back, this ancient guy counting forward, let's say we are now the ancient one and we're counting forward. Would it be possible for us to count forward to a day where we say that day exists if we didn't have this moment? No, right? No, we must have started at a certain moment to count forward. And so infinity, as we are counting forward like that, started from a point, but the premise, the philosophical argument number one, as we extend it forward, says that it's not possible also. Right? Because that number ends up being added. Right? So Ghazali's kind of argument for premise two actually is the hinge. Most people will not contend with argument number one. But argument number two is the part where the fun begins. And in my opinion, I think these things are kind of interesting kind of thought exercises, but I think they're pretty strong in and of themselves. Right? And I'm not kind of thinking this up. I'm just taking from other thinkers, and it's a line of ancient thinking, and it has existed even up until today, and books are being published about this. You can search it. It's called the Kalam Argument, right? It's actually Hebrew for moment or breath, right? Kalam Argument. Okay, there are actually quite a few more things, a few more examples that we have given when it comes to published literature, but I think we don't have to go there. Right, the picture of the domino is actually kind of expressing the same idea, right? That the domino that falls today, maybe the last one, will be where we are now. But for this domino to fall, the one previous to that must fall first, right? And so, as we're counting through the infinite number, this is what the infinite number of previous dominoes is trying to explain. Okay? Now I want to talk about this, which is a scientific argument for premise two. Right? After this, we'll move on. We'll move on to the conclusion. Okay? Big Bang. Anyone interested in stuff like that? Not the sitcom, huh? My time, this is my era. All right, so this diagram explains kind of in as possible. If a diagram is possible to even explain it, it's trying to tell us what the Big Bang is about, right? That little bright dot quantum fluctuations was the moment of beginning, right? And then there is that that super inflation moment, right, where many things happen within a short period of time, and what you're seeing here on the x-axis, that's time, right? So don't think of this as an expansion within space. It's describing time, right? And as you see, that conical space is space as we know of, right? Space expanding through time. That's what the Big Bang is talking about. And we are probably somewhere here, right? We are at this moment, and we are still experiencing that acceleration of expansion as time progresses. Yeah, that's what this diagram is saying. Now, how did the scientists kind of come up with this idea from that model, right? That balloon with the buttons on it. So, Einstein was the first one actually to kind of have an inkling about this. But his idea is that the universe doesn't expand this way. It's kind of a static, right? Because he during that time, the predominant idea in science was that the universe simply existed. Right? It was not dynamic, right? And so as he looked at his calculations, he said, no, these numbers don't add up. And so he actually fudged his equations, like a perfect scientist, right? He tweaked it such that it made sense for a static universe. Then come along a couple of German scientists. They saw the same data and they created a new model. And they're saying that as we are here, let's say look at the first balloon, right? The surface of the balloon is the observable universe, right? Space, 3D space, but represented in a 2D surface of the balloon, right? So don't think of it as a 3D balloon, but you're talking just about the surface. Right? Each of these buttons there on the balloon is a point of observation, right? And what they're saying is that as they look into the cosmos and looking at the stars, they notice the lagging of red light, right? And with that, they're thinking, okay, as light spectrum goes, the slower light is which one? The infrared area, right? And then the faster light goes towards the ultraviolet. And so when we are observing stars and we're looking at the red shift towards us, nearer to us, could it be that these stars are moving away from us, expanding away from us, right? And so the people in the northern hemisphere are looking at it and are saying, oh, the stars are moving away that way. Right? And then those scientists in the southern hemisphere looking at those research, they're looking at the stars on the other side and they're saying, oh, it's the same thing, moving away, right? And so they're saying, okay, the universe is expanding. It's kind of moving beyond us. The same star is supposedly static, but the whole system is moving away, right? And that time when science published that, some of the Christians jumped and say, you see, we humans are at the center of the universe. Then of course, kind of debunked, right? And the idea is like this balloon, right? Each of this point of observation is that button, but as space expands over time, the buttons actually remain static within that fabric of space, which is the surface of the balloon, right? Just that because the fabric itself is expanding, it looks like things are moving away. But whichever button you are on, as you look at the other buttons, all the buttons are moving away from you, right? So that kind of describes what this Big Bang concept is. And again, the cone, all right? So that's time. This is the expansion of space. But if you move it backwards, let's say if right now we see the universe expanding, if you roll it back, it would be contracting, correct? So the universe would be a little bit nearer than before. And if you bring that to its logical conclusion, then that's how the Big Bang theory came about, right? This idea, this term called Big Bang, we mustn't think of it as if there is a space, right? Let's say this empty universe, right? Kind of outer space or whichever space you want to talk about. And suddenly at the moment there was some quantum fluctuations, and then bah, and then all the planets came out of that. That's not what the Big Bang is talking about. But the Big Bang is, okay, so when we say Big Bang, it's as if in space there was a bang that happened, right? But this theory actually is more radical than that. It's saying that at that moment there was nothing else that existed. There was no space. There was no time, right? If you roll back time started together with the quantum fluctuation, right? And so this theory, actually, the universe, the scientific theory of Big Bang, or it's still a theory, right? You cannot prove it, is that our observable universe in its dimensions and in our perception of time had that moment of starting point. And I mean, of course, it's conjectured backwards from our current scientific observations. Yeah? Does it make sense? Right? Have you all heard of this before, Big Bang? Or have you heard of something else about the Big Bang that you want to share? Collate our experience and thoughts. Yeah, yeah. So I hope now it kind of puts it in a little bit more perspective, right? I mean, of course, this is extremely simplified, lah. I mean, I'm no scientist, right? Yeah. So this theory, as part of what the theory is suggesting, is that there is a beginning, lah. There's a beginning of the things and the time that we are experiencing. Interesting, and this came out from the scientific community, right? It's not a kind of philosophical Christianese kind of thinking or religious thinking, right? And right now, as far as I can research, as much as my research unveils, this is still the predominant theory. But of course, as we know, concepts of time and space are changing, right? As we know more and as we research more, these things are changing. But so far as new ideas come up, there's always some thinkers who will put their thoughts to it to try to reconcile these things. And I think, I mean, if you are one of those persons, and that's where God has called you to expand your energies, then do what you need to do and benefit the rest of us. Okay, but the standard Big Bang model predicts an absolute beginning of the universe, right? So if this model is correct, then we actually have scientific confirmation of our philosophical arguments, right? Which is that first cause argument, that the universe actually did begin to exist, right? Now, of course, there are non-standard models of the universe even now, right? This is a standard model using certain concepts of time and stuff. Non-standard models are coming out, okay? So there are some literature, which I won't share now, but if you're interested, you can go and find out, okay? Or I can point you in that direction. Okay, so as it is now, what do we have? Right, we have, in the first cause argument, we are saying that whatever begins to exist should have a cause. Right, something caused something else to exist. Right, and the universe began to exist, and therefore the universe at the moment where moment started, right? How do we wrap our heads around it? At that point where even the idea of a moment came into being, someone caused it to happen. Okay? And so the first cause argument for there being something that created our universe is this, right? That an infinite series of causes, that's philosophical argument number one, right? Is impossible, and therefore there must be a first cause that is itself uncaused, right? And this uncaused first cause created time and space, so it is beyond that. And I think that's the same concept that we must bring into Christian eternity, right? That moments are transcendent. That's the word that we use, transcendent, as opposed to being imminent, right? Within our experience, right? And it created all matter and energy, so there must be some sort of power in it, right? How you define power, I think that's something we can discuss further. So you put that together, what caused the universe? A transcendent first cause. Now this last point, the cause necessitates the effect, is the argument that brings us from an impersonal cause to a personal cause. And that personal cause is what philosophically we would define as God. Right? God is not a non-living thing, right? It's a living person. Right? But what can help us think of that transcendent first cause to be a personal first cause? Right? And again, we have thought experiments for this. Oh no, I didn't add a picture in. Yeah, there. Okay. Oh, it's already there, right? You see the ice cube and the thermometer? The thought experiment goes like that. Oh my goodness, my time. Right? Okay, so you look at the ice cube, right? The ice cube, let's say at some moment when the temperature falls to what degree? 0, right? 0 degrees, freezing point, water will become ice. Right? And so the cause of the water becoming ice is the premise, which is 0 degrees in terms of ambient temperature, right? But that ambient temperature in and of itself doesn't decide when it is 0 degrees, right? It is a state of being. Right? So if that state of being is itself non-cognizant and it's always 0, then at any point, water in that state will always be ice, right? Water cannot choose to not be ice, right? Because it is not the cause, right? The temperature caused it to become ice. But if the temperature cannot choose to be 0 or not 0 degrees, then at that state, ice will always exist. So the same for the universe. Right? We're saying that the universe had a beginning, right? And beyond that, there must be some state, right? The first cause would have been in a state to cause the universe to begin, right? But if that first cause is not cognizant of itself and has no freedom of will, that first cause was simply like temperature, it's just ambient, it's just being, then actually, even if we have a first cause, the universe will be eternal. Because as the first cause had the power and the bandwidth and the right state to cause the universe to come into being, then from eternity past, it would have happened. Right? But because the universe had a beginning, as this argument goes, it goes to show that the first cause had the ability to choose outside of time. I mean, how do you choose outside of time, a moment in time, right? But the first cause had that freedom to make the universe happen at that point in time. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Right, and so that's the argument, you can go and Google it now. Under first cause arguments, the causes necessitates the effect. And so if God is a non-personal God, God is not a God of free will. If God is just someone, a state of being, a force in which there is at any time having the power to create the whole world, then that cause will necessitate the effect that comes out. But the truth is this, our God is like that. The cause necessitates the effect. Our God is a creative God. And so out of his creative nature, creation happens. The cause necessitates the effect. But this cause, our God, has freedom, has full autonomy in all his decisions. And so out of that freedom of autonomy, as we had discussed the last time around, right, it almost, it's not necessitates, right? It's out of who he is, he created people with that same autonomy, which is us, right? Freedom of human will. We recovered the last time around, right? So that's kind of what this argument is talking about. But if we plug it into the argument of first cause, we are saying that this is proof that the first cause is not impersonal. It is a personal first cause. And personal first cause is just a synonym for God, right? When it comes to philosophical arguments. Does it make sense? All right. I hope this has been. I hope this is what you're expecting. I come here and I just throw nonsense at you. Okay? Right, and I think precisely that's what we are experiencing now as we go through an exercise like that. It says here, right? Psalms 19, the heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. And before we had certain scientific methods, we already had the capacity of philosophical methods. And I think we live in an exciting age where some of these ancient philosophical ideas can be corroborated with some of our scientific ideas. And moving forward, I think there's more opportunities for these things to happen. Right? So let me end at least the first part. Actually, this may be the whole part. Right? With this, you see, God enters into time when he creates the universe. God is timeless, the universe, right? Without creation, God is timeless. But with the universe, as we experience, we can think of it as our world, right? With the world, God is in time, right? God is in time with us. And the wonderful thing about the Christian faith is that we see this happen in Jesus Christ. Right? I think sometimes we kind of, we don't think enough about what the incarnation is. The incarnation is that transcendent God who is beyond these concepts of time and space, beyond future, beyond future, and it's kind of existing in eternity. And that's the language you use, right? God, our eternal God. Sometimes we begin praying like that. That transcendent God is in time with us, right? That's how much He wants to be imminent with creation, like you and I. All right. Okay, I'm looking at the time. I may actually skip the moral argument, but let me just move quickly, and I want to talk to you about moral argument, good and bad. I have a video here. You can watch it. Okay, discuss, obviously no time. What am I thinking? We're trying to do so many things. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is an interesting one, right? The moral argument goes like this. Okay, let me just quickly cover it. Okay, back. Hey, moving forward. Yeah, show you the answer already. Yeah, here, moral argument, right? Moral argument speaks of objectivity in terms of moral values and duties. Are these familiar words? Right, if you're a student of, what should I say, psychology or sociology, but you may have encountered some of these things. Or history, maybe history as well, right? And the moral argument goes like that. Premise one, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Right, the objectivity of morality is dependent on the existence of God, not the belief of God. All right, you don't believe in God, but still think that something is right, and that the rape of little children is wrong. You can still think that way, even if you don't believe in God, right? So premise one is if God does not exist, not if you don't believe in God. All right, so let's get that out of the way. Premise two is that these objective things do exist, right? Objective being here independent of human opinion is just kind of accepted, right? And I think this is something that we can debate about. And actually, I wanted to show you, but no time, okay? Moving forward, I want us to talk about this because this is something that concerns our time and age, right? Is morality objective or subjective? No time to discuss now, but this is a question that we must talk about. We must talk about because as we live in this postmodern age, postmodern age, many of these things that we assume to be unchanging morals are being challenged to be subjective, right? But let me just give us a short way out, right? Maybe you can think of it as an initial handle for us to think more. And the handle is this, right? No matter which side you stand, let's say you think, okay, morality is not objective, it's subjective, right? So whatever I feel and my conscience compels me, I think that's right and I should go and follow it. But no matter which camp you stand in, that idea of following your conscience would then be a new objective fact. Right? For the subjective person, right, or me standing in a subjective camp, I'm saying that, gay sex is perfectly fine, it's normal, right? And that's what my experience, my conscience tells me. But that me insisting on that, right, makes the following of the conscience itself an objective fact, moral value for me. Right? And so they cannot then say that it cannot be objectivity. All right? So that's the first handle I want to give you. And that's kind of, by and large, a lot of fallacy of what we're hearing about in the West. Right? We talk about tolerance. Hey, this Christian faith, intolerant of us. Right? But then there's that cancel culture and all these things. And that same thing can be applied both ways, right? So tolerance, as we experience it now, is actually an intolerant version of tolerant, where we tolerate only those who are tolerant of us, in other words. Right? And so when we talk about objectivity of moral values and duties, that same process can happen, and you apply it in this field. Okay? But sorry, next time we can talk about this. Don't next time, don't ask me back. Okay? All right, so I want to talk about this last bit because it brings us back to God, okay? So what's the point of talking all these things if we don't make sense of it? I've laid out for you on the left side 10 arguments for God, for there being a God, right? On the right side is what we covered the last time, an argument for there not being a God. Okay? And by and large, if you enter into the serious sphere of apologetics, and not just within Christian circles, beyond beyond the Christian scope, whether with other religions, with atheists, there will be a lot over there, a lot of arguments that we have to contend with. And on this side, by and large, the only one standing now is this, and it's a strong one, right? It's a strong one. We still don't have conclusive. We don't have a conclusive and convincing argument, right? Because much of our argument depends on those arguments there, right? Remember the starting slide that we put out. So what does this leave us with? I think from those steps, the cosmological argument, which we spend most of our time thinking about infinity, wow, why are you doing that? And the psychological arguments, which you must think about, the moral argument, I think these arguments can only bring us so far, right? They can argue about a creator of the universe. And actually that's what the moral argument is about, right? Don't get me wrong. The moral argument argues for the existence of a divine person, right? In whom we find objectivity, right? So you can look at the video lah. It's by one of the Apologetics Institute. Covers all the content I wanted to say. Right, but these arguments can only bring us to the point of recognizing the presence of a creator of the universe. But from that step to the point where we recognize this God as a personal God who is love and who has the name Jesus requires more than arguments. Right, what does it require? It requires revelation. Right, that's my next slide. The gap between apologetics and triune God of love is revelation. All right? So for us as a Christian youth group, as we contend with apologetics, what is the end to which we want to carry all these things to? Right? Imagine you go out there, right? You stand up there and you are preaching apologetics and you are the giant. Look, Ravi, right? I mean, we all know Ravi. Right? We can be a giant of apologetics. But these arguments only carry us to the point to say that, okay, fine, there is God. Right? Maybe a personal God, if I'm convinced by those arguments. Maybe the personal God is coming out from the tradition of the Judeo-Christian faith as you argue it is most convincing. That's fair. But for them to come to the point to know that this God is a triune God of love requires revelation. Right, the transcendent must come imminent into this world and show us. And that's what our story is telling. The Christian story tells this story. That a transcendent God enters into the world to tell us about who he is. Perhaps at the start through smoke and thunder and hailstones and law, right, and prophets. But the fullness of it is described in himself, coming in person. Yeah? And so knowing that there's always this gap here, again, I think if we ever have use of this knowledge, to be honest, I've never had to use this kind of knowledge in my personal interaction. Never. All right? But if we ever have use of this knowledge, we must remember, same as the problem with evil and suffering, the root problem is always emotional. Okay, not always, okay? Many times it is emotional. Right? That if we do not interact with that person in the same way as how this transcendent God chose to interact with us in love, then our arguments will fall by the wayside. Right? You will be sowing your seeds, but they never quite fall into the soil. Right? Because the Christian faith is simply not about apologetics done in that way. It's apologetics done within the context of a loving community formed in the image of the triune God. Right? That's what apologetics is supposed to be within the Christian faith. You get me? You get me? All right? So I leave you with this, that our biggest gift from God is actually revelation. Right? And you don't have to search elsewhere, you read the Bible for it. Right? You read the Bible in community and you pray and you do all the spiritual things. All right? And this God that we talk about in videos and arguments and premises is in our revelation. He wants to come and talk to us. I think that's kind of more precious than any of the other things. Okay? All right? So I'm sorry. I thought I could speak faster or I don't know what, right? But I didn't manage to cover all my content. But I want to leave you with this, and I want to pray. I want to pray for you. And I want you all to pray for one another also. I want you all to pray this, okay? I mean, of course, pray that you understand all these things. Think about infinity, start to have more concept of these things. But I want you all to pray that revelation is true for you. But as Christians, I think sometimes we still do harbor doubts about whether God is real. Right? Is God real to me? Okay, look at the historical evidence of Jesus. Oh, fine, Look at the evidence for the empty grave. Okay, they're over there. Look at philosophical arguments. They're all there. But is God real for you? That's the million-dollar question, right? And if all these things are real, then God is someone whom you can talk to and ask to make himself known and real to you. All right? And I think as a Methodist, okay, as people in the Wesleyan tradition, I think we may not realize it. Okay, but the experiential faith is the hallmark of our tradition. Right? At a time when people were not quite willing to express themselves experientially or speak about faith experientially, we were the ones who did it first. Right? So don't lose that. Don't lose that. Let that be part of what you ask for every day. Okay, but that is not everything there is to faith. Emotions are not everything there is. Experience is not everything there is. There's still reason, which is what we did. There's still scripture, which is what we must read, right? And there's still tradition as well. The whole line of church that had gone on before us, and from where we actually extracted some of these arguments from. All right, so I leave you with that, but let us spend the last moments praying together, shall we? Okay, let's close our eyes. Let us pray. Eternal God, as we speak your name and we attach that descriptor as eternal before it, we now have perhaps a little bit more understanding about how great you are. Yet another word that we use all the time and we sing all the time, but help to expand our understanding of your greatness and your eternity in light of who we are and the capacity that you've given us to think about you. But more than that, Lord, would you send your Holy Spirit? Come, Holy Spirit, and let us know you and let us experience you. And that's what we want. Lord, we want our faith to be a unity of our thoughts, our reason, and our experiences. So Lord, come and speak to us and encounter us every day and in greater degrees. And I pray for everyone who is here that this will be your greatest blessing for us, your very presence tabernacled within us in this community, in each one of our hearts. So for all of us here, I invite you to just look around you and just be aware of who's beside you, and I want you to pray for them. I want you to pray that the triune God of love will be an experience for them, that God will reveal himself to them. Just pray for the person on your left, and then on your right. And Father, as we pray, this is no longer just a thought exercise. This is not just, a philosophical argument that we're living out. This is a relationship, right? We're praying to you, Lord, because we believe that you exist and that you love us. And we know that because you revealed your love to us in the person of Jesus Christ, who lived a sinless life, who lived always in step with the Holy Spirit, and compelled by that mission that led him to the cross, and he died for our sins, even mine, even ours. So Lord, we know you love us. And so as this group of young lives continue to journey together, to contend with faith, with apologetics, with scripture, with experience, Father, journey closely with us, that we may take on the same footsteps of Christ, and come what may, Let us be anchored in strong faith. We look forward to the day when time is no more, when suffering cease to exist, and we enjoy eternity with you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thank you. Can I